a special guest with us here today. The director and owner of DD Chartered Accountants has joined us to give us a brief overview on what our options are should we choose to become self-employed. Being a locum optometrist means there's obviously taxes that we're responsible for, but no one's ever told me what I would need to do or what I need to pay. So it's lucky that I have Dipak Dhamecha on the call with us today. He might be a familiar face to some of you from our evening online OSCE revision sessions, or if you visited me at the OptoTutor office, he occasionally pops in to get some goodies or chocolates. This is Dipak Dhamecha, Chartered Accountant and my husband. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me today.
Thank you for having me, Bansi.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about what qualified optometrists would need to do if they wanted to be a locum. So how does it work in terms of their business structure? What do they need to do in terms of the taxes and financial planning?
Okay, so if someone has decided to become a locum, it's one of two main choices. Either they would be a sole trader or they would trade through a limited company. Both have their pros and cons. A sole trader is the simplest method. A self-assessment tax return is done once a year, and that's done before January of every year, and the tax is paid on that, as well as national insurance. And a more complicated structure is a limited company, whereby someone is working through a limited company. The limited company will pay taxes, and whatever is left will be distributable to the individual.
And is it possible that a person can locum as well as work in a PAYE job at the same time? So be employed somewhere and then locum on their days off?
Yeah, they can make up their mind on what they want to do. If for instance they just want to do a few locum days in the year, then I think the easiest thing to do is just set up as a sole trader, due to the admin being a lot less and it just being a lot simpler. Whereas if it's a more conscious decision that locuming is going to become a part of their lives and they're going to be earning good money from it, depending on the income, a limited company structure may be right for them at that point. But each person's circumstances will differ.
So one of the questions I got through yesterday from a recently qualified optometrist who's now locuming is that how do I go through doing my expenses? So she is locuming and then has people wanting to contact her. So she's looking at possibly getting a work phone. So how do expenses work? How do you claim whether it's through a company or as a sole trader?
So as a sole trader, you would have income and expenses that go through the tax return. So on your tax return, as your subscription is a cost of sale, without that you would not be able to work. You would just put that down as a cost. You would put a proportion of your phone expenses. So if your phone bill is £50, we know that that's not fully for business. Therefore, we would take a proportion of that as an expense. All travel expenses to locum shifts would also be allowable. If you needed to have, argument's sake, anything to do with your work, you'd be able to claim. In terms of a limited company, it would be in the same way as you reclaiming from your employer. So I don't know what arrangement some of you have got, but it may, when I was working, we would pay for our subscriptions and then give that receipt to our employer, who would then reimburse us. The same would apply within your limited company, even though it is only yourself within the limited company. So you would fill out an expense claim, in theory, attach on the invoice, and the company would then owe you that money. The subscription itself is actually made out in the individual, because from my understanding, your regulatory body is insuring yourself, not the business. But any other business expenses would be treated in that manner.
So which one would you recommend a person to go for? I know it's not clear cut, and I know that there's a lot of other factors to take into account, but would you encourage locums to set up their own company, or is it better for an individual to be a sole trader? And, you know, what are the things that kind of lean you towards one versus the other?
I think the easiest way to answer that is in my opinion, it will just be how much you're earning. So, there is a threshold. If you breach, it's actually better for you tax-wise to trade through a limited company. And anything below that, you're better off trading through a sole trader, as well as it being simpler. If you're also doing self-assessment through a sole trader, it's also simpler because if you wanted to, you can actually just do that yourself. That's not to say you can't do it yourself as a limited company, but there's just a lot more paperwork involved with the limited company.
And what are the important tax costs that I need to be aware of if I did decide to be a locum? And what dates do I need to pay all of these?
So under a sole trader, we know that you need to pay your taxes by the 31st of Jan. That's made up of income tax as well as national insurance. And if your tax bill is over £1,000 and or if 80% has not been deducted at source, so for instance, your PAYE job, then you also have to pay payments on account, basically paying 50% of last year's liability up front. And those are paid in January and July. So example being, say if your tax bill was £2,000 for your first tax year, you'd pay the £2,000 in January, as well as pay £1,000 in advance. Then in the following July, you would pay another £1,000. That means the July following your first payment, you're already up to date with the following year's tax bill. Depending on what's left, you would pay the difference, or if you'd overpaid, that would either be allocated towards the next year's payment, or you would claim a refund. The limited company would pay corporation tax once a year, which is normally 9 months after the year end. And then anything distributed to yourself would be paid in dividends to be the most tax efficient. And this would be taxed at 7.5% up to 50,000 and 32.5% thereafter. Be mindful, these are the current tax rates and they are subject to change.
Is it worth being a self-employed person? Is it worth going out there and locuming? What would you say are the risks or the disadvantages of being a self-employed person?
So you don't have that comfort of having a job. The people you're working for, they are not obliged to provide you with work. Whereas if you are working, then you've got the comfort, you've got this blanket where you are being paid every month, pretty much on the same day. You are getting your training, you are getting your support, and you are getting some holidays. Whereas as a self-employed person, if you don't work, you don't get paid. You've also got the issue whereby the practice you're working for may have 30-day payment terms, may have 60-day payment terms. So you have to put your cash flow element into there as well. There is a risk that you may not get locum days. There may be the risk that the locum rates might be down. You've also got the issue that you may have to travel far to get the rates that you're actually after. So, you have to take those risks into consideration. Self-employment isn't for everyone.
But it must work for some people, though, because there's quite a lot of people that are out there that are self-employed. So why would people do it? What are the advantages of being self-employed?
You've got the flexibility of the work. Say if you wanted to go on holiday for 2 months, or you're getting married, or you've had a child. If you don't want to work, you don't need to work for 2 or 3 months. Whereas if you were working, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to get that sort of time off, unless you're on maternity leave. But if you wanted to take a career break, that's something you'd need to discuss with your employer. And sometimes they might be happy for you to do it, and sometimes they may not. Obviously, what you have got is a financial incentive where you may need to work less days to earn the same amount of money. But again, you've got the risk that you may not always be in work.
So one of the other questions that we've got is IR35. What is it, and does it even apply to us as optometrists?
So some practices may decide not to work with you if you cannot demonstrate whether you are inside or outside IR35. So IR35 is a piece of legislation from the government which they want to deter people from just working as employees and having the tax benefit. That's the simplest way to put it. So if, for instance, you're working at a practice and you work there 5 days a week, you are actually part of that practice. You are, there is no real distinction between you being an employee or a contractor. Now, some of the things that would help you in being outside IR35 would be to have multiple clients. So what I mean by that is, if you were to work for someone, they'd probably say to you, you can't work for anyone else. Now, one of the things which would keep you outside would be you work for multiple people. So you may work for 5 practices in the month, doing odd days, doing odd hours, and being paid odd amounts. And then the following month, you may not work for anyone. And the following month, you might have another set of 5 practices or that you work with, that you're going and you're traveling for. So that's one of them. Somewhere you may work the continuity. So if you end up working the same 2 days for the same practice, it's most likely that's going to look like an employment relationship as opposed to something outside IR35. Also, the risks and rewards should lie with the limited company or the sole trader. So you may not always be in work. So there may be breaks in employment, breaks in your sole trade, breaks in when you're actually doing the work. So you may work for someone for 3 days in a week for 2 weeks, and then you may not work for them for 2 or 3 months. You are responsible for your own billing, so you will be invoicing them separately. You are responsible in certain scenarios to also pay for your own equipment. So you may have the base equipment available at the practice you're working at, but some of the equipment you may have to buy yourself. Your training, that would have to be paid for by yourself. And obviously then you are responsible for paying your own taxes. It is quite a grey area, but if you do want to talk about it, we're here to help.
So just to make it really simple, so if you are within IR35, you have to pay as if you were an employee. So you have to pay national insurance and you have to pay the income tax. Whereas if you are outside of IR35, you don't have to pay that. But to stay outside and to have the benefit of being your limited company, simple things: make sure you work in different places, work without a pattern. So instead of having a regular day working for the same practice, work at different practices. And maybe also ensure that you do take regular holidays, because employers only give those 4 weeks in the year, don't they? So maybe making sure you have regular holidays and breaking up your working pattern will ensure that you are still outside of IR35. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to explain some of this stuff to me. One of the students did actually message me the other day and said, I haven't figured everything out and I haven't yet got an accountant, but I can't seem to figure out all these little grown-up business things. It's all these things that I'm not understanding. So I wanted to also take a moment to thank you for putting together a document that I'll be sharing with the students that will go through examples of how their taxes work. And I want to encourage all students listening to this video that if you do have any questions, please contact DDCA to be able to get some information of how you can manage your either business, whether it's a limited company, or if you want to be set up as a sole trader, or get some advice as to how to manage your self-assessment if you decide to stay in your PAYE job and do locuming on the side as well. Thank you very much, Dipak, for your time.